Welcome to Mind Shift Power Podcast, a show for teenagers and the adults who work with them, where we have raw and honest conversations. I'm your host, Fatima Bey, the Mind Shifter. And welcome, everyone. Today we have with us a return guest, Erica Bess, the Trauma Master. She's a licensed therapist. She has 12 plus years of experience as a social worker and therapist, and she owns Empower Therapy. She can help you master your trauma instead of your trauma mastering you. How are you today, Erica?
I'm doing well. How are you, Fatima?
I'm good. I'm really looking forward to this conversation, and I hope that it's really helpful for someone. So as you know, in my normal fashion, I like to dive right in.
Yes.
Please explain to us, what is trauma?
Trauma is an emotional response to a distressing event that can cause a person to feel unsafe, threatened, or in danger. And it could be something as small as an act of violence. Well, that's not that small, but something as far as like an act of violence. It could be as small as stubbing your toe on a table and then you having a reaction every time you get close to a table and you freak out every time you get close to it because you hurt your toe. Or it could be
Mhm.
something catastrophic where your house got on fire or go into domestic violence. There's many different types of trauma, but all of them affect you in a way where you feel unsafe.
Well, okay. So having said all of that, because I want people to really realize that the word trauma is, even though you just defined it, it's so generalized when people hear it. So what are some of the other words or phrases that people use when they really mean trauma?
Oh, a good one is triggered.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you hear I've got issues and they don't really want to say the word trauma, maybe they don't even know the word trauma exists,
Right.
but a lot of the language has developed around it, but it means trauma.
What are some other words?
Let's see. I would say triggered is definitely a word I hear a lot, and I feel like it's overused.
Oh, it definitely is overused. I talked about it in an episode a few weeks ago.
hmm
I did an episode called mental fashion, and how people overuse that word like it's a new clothing item. And they do. And yeah, that's one of the words people use. But there are many, many different words that people use. And I want to say that to the audience, the word trauma has its definition, as she just read, but as she just stated, but just know that sometimes people don't recognize that that's what they're dealing with and talking about.
hmm
So why do you specialize in trauma?
I specialize in trauma because I've had my own experience with trauma, and I feel like I have done personal work as an individual and as a clinician to help me get over and through my trauma. And I feel like the things that I have learned, I've always wanted to help implement with other people who I'm working with to help them overcome their trauma as well. So that's always been my space of working with therapy and social work.
How does someone know that they have trauma?
I think the biggest thing that somebody could know that they have trauma is that they have difficulty in their relationships with other people.
Mm,
And they might keep hitting a brick wall. And when I say brick wall, keep finding themselves in situations where they're not getting along with people, not able to relate to others,
mm-hmm.
and find themselves isolated because the way that they react to certain situations might push other people away from them and they'll find themselves lonely.
Ooh, that's a big one. How they react in relationships, that is huge,
Yeah.
because there's a whole lot of people running from relationship to relationship and getting caught up in the details of that, of why they broke up or what went wrong, when in fact they have undealt with trauma that
Yeah.
keeps getting triggered over and over and over again, and
Absolutely.
they keep blaming the other person when in fact it's what you carrying around with you.
Yeah. And no matter what that other person does to try to make that person feel secure, it's going to keep hitting a brick wall. So that person would definitely need to seek some professional help. That's how they would know that they
I
have
just
that
thought of an
trauma.
analogy, just now, and
hmm
I'm going to say it to the audience. Trauma is like a carrying around a snake.
Mm.
You don't realize the snake is in your bag and your clothes. It just keeps running around all over you. And the second you get close to somebody, that snake bites somebody. And then you
Mm.
look at that person like, why are you jumping back? What's
Right.
wrong with
What's
you?
wrong with you? You don't like my pet snake?
Right. When in fact, the snake keeps biting everybody you get close to because you
Mhm.
haven't dealt with that snake.
Right. And that snake and you have become so close that you don't even realize that he's biting you and that you've been poisoned and that you're living with the poison inside of you.
Ooh, there you go. Taking my analogy to the next level.
To the next
Absolutely.
level, girl.
That is absolutely true.
Mhm.
And I like to give people visuals to really kind of get the point
Mhm.
what trauma does.
Yes.
And it affects does can trauma also affect people at work?
Absolutely. Any when I say relationship, I don't mean just boyfriend, girlfriend, husband, wife
Mhm.
relationship. I'm talking about relationship with your family, relationships with your coworkers, relationships with bosses, relationships with your children. Any type of relationship that you have with a person, and if you have undealt trauma, it could affect any relationship that you have.
Right. For example, I'm going to
Mhm.
give make this up. It's made up, but it's not really made up. I know someone that was raped by drunk men.
Mm,
So when they get around the smell of a lot of alcohol, it traumatizes them and brings them back to that moment.
absolutely.
So going to bars is not a good idea for them.
Right, because it
It
triggers the
it elicits a
PTSD.
response
Uh-huh.
that makes them kind of spiral out. Now everybody's going to do something different when they spiral out. We're not all the same, but
Absolutely.
uh, that's a pretty deep and harsh one, a very sensitive one, but it's a real one, and I've seen it. You
Absolutely.
know, we've been cheated on, so
Yeah,
now we think everybody we're dating is a cheater.
is a
So
cheater.
now we
Yeah.
got trust issues. We've been traumatized in that particular area. Just
Mhm.
giving people more examples. We've been
Absolutely.
traumatized in that particular area. So now
Mhm.
every time we get into a relationship, we give the person we're with the undue burden of constantly proving themselves
Absolutely.
and affirming you. And what you really need to deal with is the trauma that trust issue came from. Most of the
Exactly.
time when people have trust issues, it didn't just come from somebody cheating on them. Nine
Right.
times out of 10, I find it actually came from something deeper
You
before
know what
then.
I found out with being a therapist? I find out that it comes from either your parental figures or your biological parents, whoever raised you. And especially, I noticed when you are not raised by your biological mother, like if you've been adopted, if you've been in foster care, if you were raised by a grandparent, there's always seems to be some kind of void that I've noticed as a
Yeah,
therapist in those
very
type of
often.
people. So they might need a little, if you are one of those people, I would suggest that you definitely get a consultation with a therapist just to see if there's anything there that you don't even realize that you're traumatized by.
It's a snake running around biting
Mhm.
everything around you.
Right. You so
Undealt
immune
with
to the
trauma.
snake. Yeah, you so immune to the snake you don't even know. So just go get a consultation to see because I think those people are definitely at a higher risk of trauma and not having those initial relationships
Right,
established. So then it makes every relationship that they have going forward difficult, you know?
right. And I would say, going back to what Erica said, I'm talking to the audience again. I would just want to kind of reiterate what Erica said earlier. A lot, and I do mean I'm making up my own number, but I believe 90% of relationship issues come from undealt with trauma in
Mhm.
one form or another.
Yep, either from your
And
mother or your father
yeah, or
or
something else,
whoever raised you or
or
yeah,
something
whatever
else, whatever
experience
it
you
is,
had. Yeah.
whatever
And
it
then there's
is.
multiple traumas on top of traumas. That could
Usually,
be
off
your
more often than
initial,
not.
yeah, and then boom. But nobody makes it out of this life without experiencing some sort of trauma.
That is very true. You've said that before, and the more I've
Mhm.
dealt with people, the more I recognize that that is true.
Mhm.
And if you think you haven't dealt with trauma, that what that tells me is that you don't recognize your snake.
Yeah.
That's what that tells me.
Some people
You
walk
don't.
around with boa constrictors and pythons.
Yeah, they got a whole anaconda festival going on around
Right,
them
right.
getting
I got a little
recognized.
tree snake in my bag. I'm okay.
Right, right. Nah, it's true. I'll use that analogy from now on. So once we recognize we have trauma, what do we do?
I think once we recognize it, it's time for us to take some steps as individuals to say, okay, what is my trauma? Where did it come from? Let me speak to a professional and have a consultation with a professional to really get it analyzed by somebody who's in the field and is qualified to tell you, what you've experienced is definitely a traumatic event for you. And then they might be able to also diagnose you with a post traumatic stress disorder, which is a byproduct of trauma, which is basically a disorder that you develop when you are traumatized by something that really affects you deeply. And you might have symptoms such as hypervigilance, anger, moodiness, anxiety. And this comes from, I hate to use the word trigger, but let's say you, like you said, like you have a car accident, right? And every time you come to the same spot where you had that car accident,
Oh
you
yeah.
start to get the emotional feelings of what happened right before it, and then your body might respond physically. Your hands might start getting sweaty. You start having chest pains and rapid heartbeat, and then you start to get shaky again around the same area that you had that same car accident. So something like that. That's
Yep.
considered PTSD as well. Flashbacks, nightmares. Let's say it's like somebody got raped. They're more likely to have trauma, nightmares, and flashbacks, and coming back, or like you said, the smell of the beer as an example. That's a trauma response, a flashback to the event that happened. So anytime she smells that or any type of sound could trigger it as well.
Right.
She's taken back into that moment and she's suffering from the PTSD that came from that actual traumatic event.
I can tell you that when you talked about the car accident, I was like, yeah, I was just talking about that with a
Mm,
young woman who got into a car accident, and just talking about the trauma that came from that for me. It was
yeah.
many years ago now, but I got into a bad car accident where there was one witness and he was shocked that I was alive. And
Wow.
in that area where the car accident happened, I would not travel.
Mm,
And any area that looked like that area, I would not get on that road. And it took me a while to be able to travel in those types of no shoulder rural areas again.
mm-hmm.
And I remember almost having just almost hyperventilating when a friend of mine, and I was a passenger, he was driving, he lived out in the country, he was driving on that same type of road.
Oh my
Um,
goodness.
and I just was almost freaking out because I
Mm-hmm.
was traumatized from that accident. It took me a while to get over it,
Absolutely.
but I eventually I did. But
Absolutely.
it can be. There's so many different kinds of trauma. So
Absolutely.
is everybody's trauma the same?
Absolutely not. Just like we all have different fingerprints, we all have different traumas, we all have different upbringing, and we all have different responses to the traumas.
Yeah, but your trauma's not as bad as mine, so it can't be that bad, right?
You can't tell anybody how bad their trauma is because they're the ones who are experiencing it, you
Right,
know?
right,
So
right.
it's every individual for their own, and each therapist will deal with it as it comes, but nobody's is the same for sure. Even
Let
if
me
we
ask you.
experience the same thing. Like let's say we
That's
both
true. That's true. That's
got
true.
raped, I might experience it this way and you could have experienced it this way, but we went
Yeah.
through the same trauma. Mhm.
And by the way, sidebar, and I know I've said this several times on different episodes, if you have been sexually assaulted or raped, you 1000%
Have
have
trauma.
trauma.
Mhm.
And if you think you can just run by life and get over it without help, you are 1000% wrong.
Absolutely.
It is never, ever, 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 never, 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 ever true that you don't need some kind of mental help if you've
Right.
been through that.
Right.
I have never seen it. I've counseled way too many people to believe otherwise.
Absolutely. When you were talking about going back and uh what certain things brought up for you for the car accident, I was thinking about what you just said about the trauma with the sexual assault and things like that, and with my own sexual um abuse. I would refuse to go down the street that it happened on for years. I would
Good
avoid the
example.
street, because it would bring up the memories, and if I saw the house, it was just like, "Oh, boy." So I would make my way to go all the way around the corner so I didn't have to go down that block.
I want to add to that. I'm talking to listeners right now. If you haven't been through some of the stuff we're talking about, whether you have or not, actually, when you see people acting quote unquote weird about things, I want you to think about this episode.
Mhm.
90% of the time, when people are acting quote unquote weird, they're not freaking weird. They're reacting to trauma and
Yeah.
sometimes don't know what else to do.
Mhm.
Think about that the next time you think that someone's acting weird or funny. Dig a little deeper, because 9 times out of 10, they're reacting to some sort of trauma and they're not weird.
Absolutely. I used to flinch sometimes after I was in a domestic violence relationship years later, and being in a new relationship, and my boyfriend would maybe try to go reach for something or try to give me a hug, and I would flinch. And he would ask me, "Why do you do that? I'm never going to hit you." And I was like, "Oh, I didn't even realize I was doing it." But that's because I had been in a relationship prior to that with so much physical abuse that I was afraid when I would see a hand go up. And that was my trauma response. Yeah.
And there's a lot of people out there who are like that now. And by the way, we're not just talking about women, because this happens to men a lot and they just don't talk about it.
Mhm.
So if you are a man listening, and we're talking about you too.
Absolutely. You guys need the more support than anybody, because nobody believes you guys when you speak up and say, "Hey, yeah, this girl is hitting on me and stuff." And it's the men that have the respect for women not to hit them back who are getting beat up at home and tortured.
Yeah. And it does happen, you guys. It's a real thing.
Yeah.
It happens a lot more than you think.
And then some men
Um,
call and then the police won't even take them serious.
yeah, that's got to change in our culture. That's got to change in
Absolutely.
our culture. Does
Absolutely.
anyone completely get over their trauma?
I would say if it's a real extensive trauma, I don't think that they completely get over it. I think they have to go through some things and do their own personal work so that they can function at a higher level. But when it comes to completely getting over it, I don't think you're ever going to forget what you've gone through unless you've had a lobotomy. And I feel like the memory is going to always be there. There may be something that might always bring that memory to the forefront of your mind. But when you do the therapy that you need to do and the personal work that comes with the therapy, I think that you can get yourself into a much healthier place and develop a lot of balance so that your relationships can also reflect that, and you can function at a healthy level in everything that you do once you get the help that you need and address the trauma for what it is, and check yourself. You basically have to check yourself when you're dealing with trauma, because it's like, well, how am I affecting other people with my trauma?
So what I'm hearing is that you can get over your trauma instead of staying under it, but you'll
Absolutely.
never completely uh, leave all parts of it behind,
Yeah, that's what
because
I
there's
feel.
still going to be parts of it in you or around you or about you.
Absolutely. We all have memories. There's certain memories that
Right.
just will not, no matter how much therapy you get, some memories are just imprinted, you know.
Right.
And you can talk to your therapist to process it. You can talk to your therapist about developing coping skills to help you deal with it. But a therapist doesn't have a magic wand or an eraser that can clear your mind,
Right.
you
And
know?
anyone that tells you that they do, please run,
Yeah,
because they're lying and stealing your money.
liars.
Now, can you give us some examples of what it looks like when someone mastering their trauma?
Ooh, what it looks like when you are mastering your trauma. Okay. So you're going to start to feel a lot more positive. You're going to start to
Hmm.
uh take better care of yourself. Your self-care is going
Hmm.
to go up. You're going to start doing things that make you happy. You're going to start surrounding yourself with positive people and line yourself with opportunities. You might reconnect spiritually with God, and even volunteer, do something for your community. Like, you're going to be very positive and have a mindset of doing good and thinking positive, and it's just going to reflect in all areas of your life.
That's a really good, those are some really great examples of
Thank you.
how to tell when when you've begun to master your trauma.
Hmm.
Because I think sometimes if we don't mention those things, people think, well, if I'm not at A, I'm at A right now. If I'm not at Z, well, then I didn't go anywhere.
Right.
No, progress is a process.
Yeah, and it's
And
not linear.
everything you just mentioned is part of that progress.
Hmm.
And you begin to say, wait a minute, you know what? I don't really care that much about being near the bar anymore.
Right.
That's
That's
when you
huge
begin to, that's
progress.
a huge, yeah.
Yeah.
Um,
I think
when
communication as well. I forgot that. Like, you'll be able to communicate more effectively once you're, dealing with your trauma, and you'll be able to express to others rather than shutting down, or rather than blowing up and getting an attitude or cursing somebody out who didn't deserve it because you didn't deal with your trauma. I think when you start to
mm,
respond better with those type of behaviors, I think that's when you know that you're starting to make progress for sure.
yeah, good point. Um, so let me ask you this. What advice do you have for the listener right now that is just recognizing some of what you're talking about?
If you are recognizing any of the things that we have spoken about today, I think that it would be wise for you to just do some research on a therapist and ask around and see if they are a good fit for you, and just have a conversation with them. Do a free consultation and see if some of the things that we spoke about here today are some of the things that are reflected in your life. And just kind of speak with somebody, connect with them, see if they match your vibe, and start doing therapy.
And stop carrying that snake around called
Yeah,
trauma.
get that snake out the bag. We don't need the snakes anymore. And
Now,
if you
speaking of
do, you
which,
can tame it. Tame the snake.
for
Yeah.
real, once you
Not
begin
saying
to
we
recognize
can't say
it,
the snake is gone, but the snake could be tamed. Yeah.
right, it
Mhm.
can be tamed or its
Yeah.
teeth can be removed.
Yeah, devenom. Yeah, absolutely.
Devenomized so that it
Yeah.
can't hurt those around you or yourself anymore. It might
Devenomized
still be
by
there,
therapizing.
but yep, by therapizing. Speaking of getting a good therapist who can help you, um, Erica is the trauma master, so she specifically specializes in helping people to get over their trauma instead of staying under it. So,
Absolutely.
Erica, tell them what services you do offer.
Well, I provide individual counseling, family counseling, with my Empower Therapy, and then I work with you with Bay and Best, and Bay and Best is basically groups for women, teenagers all the way up to grown women, that we help get them through their trauma. I'm not going to say over, through their trauma by support. So I have my hands in a lot of things, but I'm definitely doing individual counseling and group counseling.
And do you do them virtually?
I do. My empowered therapy services are completely 100% virtual
So that
and
means
I work
anybody
with
listening
Yeah.
can get a hold of you if they really want to and they actually want to,
Yeah,
as I like to say, get over what they've been under when it comes to
exactly. If you
trauma.
are in New York State, I can treat you. Yes, absolutely. We can help
Okay.
you master your trauma.
And how can people find you?
ericabest.com.
Could you spell that?
Yes, I can. ERICABESS.com.
And it will be in the podcast description and the show notes for those of you if you want to get a hold of her and see what else she's doing. And yes, with I just wanted to reiterate with Bay and Best, that's something that we work on together, and we do group therapy sessions for teenage girls, women, adult abuse survivors, and Spanish speaking women. But
Yes,
the Resilient Roses, which is our group for the women adult abuse survivors, we specialize in helping women with their trauma, and we get them from all different walks of life, and we absolutely love it. And you couldn't pay us to not do it because it's wonderful
absolutely.
to watch people get breakthroughs.
Mhm.
So it's something that we're both very passionate about and enjoy helping people to
Absolutely.
move to their next level.
We see where
So
they start
Erica,
and grow.
sorry, say it again.
We see where they start when they first start working with us, and we watch their growth over time.
Oh my God. Yeah. It's so amazing. It's so exhilarating, really. Like we get
It
so
is.
freaking excited. Like we just went to the biggest candy store in the world and we're a kid
Hmm.
after our sessions,
It's
because
true.
we're like, oh my God, did you see that? This is so awesome.
Absolutely.
Um, so once again, Erica, best trauma master, thank
Yes.
you for
Thank
coming on
you.
again.
Thank you for having me.
And now for a mind shifting moment. For everyone listening right now, I know for a fact that most of you have undealt with trauma. You can try to deny it, you can pretend it's not there, or you can sweep it under the rug and pretend like it's not a big deal. But I promise you, what you haven't dealt with is already dealing with you. What sort of thing have you been through or dealt with that has affected your mindset, your attitude, your fears, your beliefs, your feelings? What do you have in your treasure chest, in your closet that you just chose to put away? I promise you, it's already affecting you. I would admonish you today to try to start to do something about it. You'll never get over a thing. You'll never get through a thing overnight, but you can start today. Thank you for listening to Mindshift Power Podcast. Please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel at The Mindshifter. If you have any comments, topic suggestions, or would like to be a guest on the show, please visit fatimabay.com/podcast. Remember, there's power in shifting your thinking. Tune in for next week.